Oh man, here we go back with another one.
Yes, we are back. Make sure you subscribe to become part of the tribe. Do us right, hit that like, and comment if you're rocking with the content. Now, we have a very special guest in the building.
We do. Yes, we do.
And as we always say, he's the most recent.
So he's the most special.
So he's the most special. But we have a very, very special guest, an educator, professor, a lawyer, civil rights aficionado, and just an overall great man. And we're going to dive into his life and what he's done over his career.
Right.
We've got Dr. TJ Davis, not in the building,
no,
but he's in a building somewhere.
Yes, that's correct.
How are you doing? How are you doing, Dr. TJ?
I'm doing well. Okay.
So let's just dive right into it. You are a educator at ASU currently, correct?
Well, yeah, I'm retired from university, but I was at the university for a quarter of a century.
Okay. You have a background in law and civil rights history. Let's start with the civil rights part of it. Let's take you back to your earlier years as you were growing up. What made you really want to pursue the avenues that you did as far as being a lawyer, being a civil rights historian? What got you into that?
Accident.
Okay.
I mean, in part, it's the accident of life. So you asked me about the law and civil rights. My initial response to that was walking down my street.
Okay.
I grew up in New York City.
Okay.
Formative years in the South Bronx. It was a place where only white policemen patrolled the streets. I could look out my window. I remember specifically one day looking out my window on 163rd Street, and this white cop decided that he would chase one of the guys. He pulls out his weapon on the street, broad daylight, middle of the day, people on the street. He pulls out his service weapon and he's chasing this kid. And I'm thinking to myself, someone here is crazy, right? Someone here is wrong.
Right.
I don't know what the kid had done, but he's fleeing. He's not a threat to anybody immediately. The threat is this police officer.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that's not really an isolated incident.
No.
I have great respect for the people in blue who serve and protect. But in the world in which I lived, I don't know who the police were serving, but those of us in the community were certainly not sure that they were serving us or protecting us.
So about how old were you when that happened? If you can remember.
I don't know. Somewhere between 10 and 14, maybe.
Okay. So early teens.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's sort of a shorthand way to say that I just laughed because you guys are probably familiar with, I mean, this is before your time, but we had these riots back in the 60s. And President Lyndon Johnson decided that he'd have this commission, and they wrote a report. The report came to be called the Kerner Commission Report. Otto Kerner, governor of Illinois, who subsequently had to go to prison, but that's beside the point. The report had a line that has always stuck with me, and it said that, and this is a rough quote, sort of a paraphrase, the United States is tending toward two societies, one black, one white. And I'm thinking, where have you been? This is not tending toward, this is existence. This is what has existed, right?
Right.
And so the little anecdote I gave you about the police officer on the chase was a reiteration of my understanding from a very early age.
Okay.
That there were at least two societies.
Yeah.
That were separate and unequal. And that sense of systemic wrong, you might say, is a theme that propelled my interest in law and in doing civil rights law.
Okay. So go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say, whereabouts of school did you start your, like what colleges did you go to starting your career out?
Okay, so I went to Fordham College, College of Arts and Sciences at Fordham University, which is in the Bronx. I went from Fordham to Columbia University. I got my law degree at the University of Buffalo.
Okay.
So, and I have a master's in journalism from a place in Indiana called Ball State University.
Okay. So talk to us about early on as you're getting into civil rights. And I want to stick with the civil rights thing. Early college years are very, very important, right? Life is changing. You're trying to figure out what you want to do. And yet you're living in this world where, like you said, things are separate and unequal. And I'm guessing that you kind of have this feeling of, I want to do something. What was your early experience with civil rights movements, where you were in New York, as you were starting to become a young adult?
Well, those are sort of separate.
Okay.
Because I was a day student at college, right?
Okay.
So I'm taking the bus to campus and taking the bus home from campus.
Okay.
These are two different worlds. Okay.
Right.
Two different worlds. And so at home, in a Black neighborhood, Black Hispanic, not, so and this is the early 60s. And my guys are picketing White Castle. We're on a sort of don't trade where you can't work.
Okay. Okay.
There's that part of my life.
Right.
The other thing I'd like to say is that I started the show earlier, or maybe it was before we went live, but an accident, accident it's not a throwaway, because in the sense that I know there are people, I've taught persons who have a clear idea from a very early age what they want to be, what they're going to do, okay? Right. I went to law school with guys and women who their fathers or mothers were lawyers. The family had a law firm. They knew what they were going to do, right?
Okay.
That was not me. Okay. All right. So I say each step in my career, the progression really has been opportunities open.
Okay.
And I found myself doing stuff. And in that, I have to say that God has blessed me abundantly.
Okay.
Okay. So I at no point in my life ever sort of sat down and said, in 5 years, this is what's going to be.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'd say certainly in my early years, I never did that.
Okay.
Toward the end of my career, I certainly said, in 5 years, you will not be doing this.
Okay. Understandable.
But early on, things just happened. So on the civil rights issue, I spoke to you about the riots and disruption. And so one of the things that Lyndon Johnson did was to create the so-called Great Society program, right?
Okay.
And part of that was a series of community-based programs where there were community representatives to sort of what we call anti-poverty councils or council against poverty.
Okay.
And so I had the opportunity to serve under both Mayor Robert Wagner Jr. and Mayor Lindsay on the Anti-Poverty Council in New York.
Okay.
So, I mean, essentially, I think of myself looking back, I'm this kid, literally. Mm-hmm. I'm sitting on this council with some heavy hitters in New York.
Right.
I mean, people from Wall Street, really heavy hitters.
Right.
And I'm representing my community. And it occurred to me, and I told you about the sense of the separate and unequal, mm-hmm. but we're discussing programs, sort of what to do. And I think the original council had something like 28 members on it, and 4 or 5 of us were Black.
Wow.
A couple of representatives from Brooklyn were Black. And in any case, the point I'm going to here is that these folk outside of Black representatives really had no idea of what was going on in the community, right?
Right.
And so they're talking about programs that don't reach the people.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Which is a theme that, is a lesson that stuck with me sort of forever.
Okay.
And as an aside to that, I sort of worked my way through school and did a variety of jobs. And I remember one particular place, I worked for a nationwide corporation, and they decided to bring in a consulting firm.
Okay.
To figure out how the workers should do their job.
Okay.
And so, they came around and sort of looked around, a walk through a couple of hours, and they were gone, and they came back with this report.
Okay.
And so I was a manager, and I talked with my folk about this. I said, what do you think? And we got the report, and every section had this little tear out, right?
Okay.
This is what you're supposed to do. When you come in the morning, you do this, you do that. And to a person, everybody just laughed.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
And so one of my guys said, listen, Mr. Davis, here it is. You can either have us do our job, or we can do what it says on this piece of paper. The two things don't come together.
Okay.
And that's a long way of my saying that so often the people who know, the people who are doing the job day in and day out are not the people who get asked about the job, right?
Right. Very true. Very true.
Mm-hmm. And so I tried to explain to my supervisor, I said, listen, I don't know what you paid these guys, the consulting firm, to do this, but this is not working.
Right.
So either you can let me loose and let my people do what they do, or I don't know what's going to happen, because this is not a scheme that actually works.
Right.
And let me segue into something else on that. Back from the 60s also. One of my coworkers, one of my employees, had an accident on the job.
Okay.
She was hurt and she went out on workers' comp. On workers' comp in New York, you go down to, everybody called it the welfare department. I don't recall now what the actual name of the department was. And she went down.
Okay.
And they fixed her up with a package. She was a single mom. She had 2 sons. One was a 16, 17-year-old teenager. The other was about 8, right?
Okay.
So she's out and she comes in and we talk. And at the same time, I'm having a conversation with the district supervisor, because we were always short-staffed. Okay.
Okay.
And there, I'll take another quick diversion. We were always short-staffed. And I wasn't arguing with the district manager, but I was trying to help him understand some things, right?
Okay.
And he would talk about people being lazy and not wanting to work. And I was saying to him, these are hardworking people. And considering what you are paying, you should sort of be grateful that anybody shows up for work, because, I mean, you're paying minimum wage.
Right.
So back to the young woman who went out. She came in and we sat down and she said, Mr. Davis, I don't think I'm coming back.
Okay.
I said, well, are you healing up? Everything all right with you? And she said, it's not that. It's that considering what I'm now getting from public assistance, I'm making as much as I did when I came to work. But being at home now, I'm able to see my son, my younger son, out in the morning. I'm able to give him breakfast. I'm able to be there when he comes home. I'm able to look out the window and see how he's doing.
Yeah.
And, my older son, he was at that age, 16, 17, where I was really worried about him because I wasn't there to keep an eye on him.
Right. Right.
Right. And so she said, listen, after taxes and it doesn't make sense for me.
Right.
Yeah.
To come to work.
Yeah.
All right. So my district supervisor is in and he's looking at my paperwork and he's saying, well, she's not coming back to work. And I said, well, no. She is situated well in her family situation. It's better for her. And he went off on this thing about lazy people and people, welfare queens or whatever. I said, no, just you have to stop that, right? Just stop that. If you paid her a wage that allowed her to take care of all of her responsibilities, then she would make a different choice.
Yes.
Right.
But considering the fact that you're not paying her a living wage and she has to scuffle and do all of this stuff. No, I mean, so don't start bad mouthing her, and don't bad mouth the social network that provides for this.
Right.
Well, we had heated words because he was upset with me. And on that, you asked me about my career. One of the things that I will say to you is that, you can look at me on the screen and you notice that I'm an African-American person, right?
Of course.
So, and I expect that both of you have perhaps had this experience in your lives. People take a look at you and they assume what you're going to say or how you're going to be on a particular issue, right?
Very true.
So part of my heated exchange with my district manager at that time was, you know, you're dismissing my comments because you just think that I'm Black and I'm taking up for other minorities. No, that's not it at all.
Right.
The question is not here. The question is not on the face of it, race. Your comments are about race, but her situation is not about race. Her situation is about what's right in the workplace.
Right.
And so you can imagine that that the give and flow in that conversation was, shall we say, a little testy.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's crazy because I feel like that's still happening today, you know, where unfair wages, in a sense, or people aren't getting the correct wage that, you know, for the job that they are doing. And they get, you know, something happens at the workplace, and that does happen a lot. I mean, I see it where even I'm at right now, you know, and I'm sure, you know, we all can. And I feel like that's still a big problem, even from years ago, even to this day, you know?
Well, I got into employment and labor law exactly because of that.
Okay.
And again, there are people who actually work, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Particularly physical laborers. But you can go into any workplace and see who's actually doing the work, right?
Right.
What we might call the heavy lifting.
Right.
And then you can look at the pay scale in that particular situation and see who's at the bottom of the pay scale, right? And over the years, I've asked the question, because what happens is that people think, observers often say that, well, no, those people who are doing the heavy lifting, they're replaceable, right?
Right.
Or what I often hear is anybody could do that job.
Right.
Okay. And to which my response is, no, anybody can't do that job.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, can you do that job?
Right.
And the answer is no.
Yeah.
And so on that, teaching US history, we have this thing, American Negro slavery, right? And you read the commentary and they talk about enslaved persons as unskilled labor. Right?
Right.
So I used to help my classes. I would take in some sugarcane. You know, we used to be able, sugarcane used to be in the grocery store, right?
Right.
You could go get a stalk of sugarcane. And you know how hard sugarcane is, right? It's like bamboo.
Yes, yes.
And I didn't have any machetes, but I would bring in a weight, okay?
Okay.
And I'd pass it out in the classroom and I'd say, okay, here it is. Sun up, you go out and you start hitting these things with the weight, right? And you're gonna work from sun up to sundown. You're gonna get a mid-afternoon break, but this is what you're gonna do. So how long do you think you're gonna last, right?
Right.
You know, because just swinging the weight.
Right, just the repetitive movement.
Don't hit anything, right? Don't hit anything, just swing the weight. To help them understand that not anybody falls out into the field and does this.
Right.
When we look at rice cultivation in places like South Carolina and Georgia, right? They're staple crop. They imported folks from Africa who had knowledge of rice growing culture to do that.
Right.
But at the same time, your commentary you are teaching people that the folks who are doing this work have no skills.
Right.
I mean, there is a disconnect here that somebody needs to pay attention to, because it speaks to the basic dynamic of workplaces and who's getting paid and who isn't.
Right.
I read a stat the other day. You're familiar with the fact that presently we have the so-called Great Resignation, where the argument is that people can't find folks to fill jobs and blah, blah,
right.
blah.
Right.
And wages are going up. Okay. Wages are going up. And in some places, the beginning minimum wage is going to be $15 and change, right?
Right.
Since 1968, the average CEO compensation at US corporations has increased 1,200 plus times, right? 1,200 plus times.
Wow.
The average worker, you want to guess whether they've increased 1,200 plus times?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Right, yeah. I'm pretty sure it's a lot less than that.
Yeah, anyway, it's much.
Do you think that is a indirect relation to slavery, like the way the wages have, like, do you think that corporations didn't pay people as much because as Black people started to get more integrated into jobs and to different, and just in jobs in general, that they were normally the ones that were being hired? I mean, especially when you look at like factory work in the Midwest. Do you think that was in direct correlation to the slavery and the ending of slavery?
Well, until you put that last part on about the ending of slavery, I thought I had an answer.
Right. Okay.
So let me say this, I think sort of in three parts. First, the wage employment situation in America has always been bifurcated by race and gender.
Okay.
And so for a long time, there was Negro work or Black work, and then there was women's work, right? So the quote, ideal person in the workplace was a white male, which was the ideal person in society, right?
Right.
And that was literally the guy who got paid.
Right.
Whatever he was doing, he was top dog.
Right.
All right. So back to who's replaceable. Back to who is scrambling for the crumbs. I mean, that's an imposition of the capitalist system. Okay. So there's a Negro wage, there's a women's wage, and then there's, right, a white man's wage. And in 2022, right, white women, right, take race out of the equation, white women are making about 23 cents an hour less, or 23% less than white men are making.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
And that's just about a gender difference.
Right.
Okay? Has nothing to do with the job. Right? So we have this equal pay for equal work, which has never been the case.
Right.
I hope one day it gets to be the case, but we've been pushing at this for quite a while, and we've had some incremental changes, but not much. So interestingly, I was speaking to you about how CEO compensation has increased 1,200%. One of the things I know is that increasingly, although still small, we get women like Mary Barra at Ford, right? She's the CEO. But if you go back and look at what she makes, as opposed to what her predecessor, a white male, makes, there's still a gap, right? Now, she has the same title, she's doing the same job, one would think that her salary should be the same.
Right.
And back to my experience in employment and labor law. So you look at the payroll at a particular place, and you see job titles and you see pay grades, right? Most places have ranges for a pay grade, right? And you don't have to know anything, but you just look down the payroll and you wonder why somebody who's in category A, right? And you see what the pay range is, and you see that there are folks at the top of the range and you see people at the bottom of the range. And the guys at the top of the range are all guys, and they just happen to be all white.
Right.
And folks who are at the bottom of the range
are
not white, and they're not guys.
Right.
But see, that's an accident.
Right.
And if you talk to the people who are running the place, they'll tell you that this is just what people do. So back to your comment about slavery. The United States is a nation that has grown from immigration. If you look at the progress of immigration, you note something significant about the flow regionally. Where were immigrants going? Well, before 1865, they were shunning the South for the most part.
Right.
They were flowing into some places like New Orleans, but they were shunning the Georgias, the Alabamas of the world.
Right.
Why? Because they didn't want to compete with slave labor.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Now, check out this statistic.
Okay.
In 1860, the South, meaning the 11 states that seceded, plus the 4 states that did not secede, the so-called border states, all the states that maintained slavery as a group, were the richest region of the United States. Okay?
Yeah.
In 1865, at the end of the war, they became the poorest region in the United States. You might ask yourself, why? Why was that? The accounting metric had to change because 40% of the South's wealth was in the bodies of enslaved people, right? They had been counted as property.
Right.
Well, after the 13th Amendment, they could no longer legally be counted as property.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So this issue about who's on top and who's the bottom rail does reach back to slavery.
Okay.
And the fact that emancipation, that great jubilee, turned these nearly 4 million persons out without a job and without any possessions, right?
Right. Right.
Because they could own nothing.
Right.
At law.
Right.
Right? So literally, when they walked off with the clothes on their back, they were stealing. Right? They were taking that which did not belong to them.
Right.
And so where I would go with that is that when we look at the criminal statutes in the United States, particularly in the Southern United States, those do all reach back to slavery and control of enslaved persons. About, well, you can't have that.
Right.
And if we look at the economic development of the United States, we see how that plays out in the sense that minority persons have always been in a situation of disinvestment. which is to say that when they get something, it's taken away.
Right.
And the prime example of that would be American Indians, right?
Yeah.
You know, this stuff is continually taken away. Yeah. And if you go back 30 years when we just started with Indian casinos, the argument was they shouldn't have that, right? They shouldn't have that because they're going to have stuff we don't have.
Right.
And here in Arizona, that continues to be a sore point.
Yes.
Right?
Very
the
much.
whole gambling issue and the fact that Native American casinos can do things that others outside the reservations are unable to do.
Right.
Yep.
So I want to talk to you about what's recently been happening with the education system. And I forget the term that it's been rolling around. I haven't seen it in a couple of weeks, but basically
critical race theory.
Critical race theory. Thank you. What are your feelings about that in general? I'll just let you talk about it and what you think about what's going on.
Well, first, we have a highly polarized society. More polarized now than for a very long time.
Okay.
All right. And so the sides, the polls, right? People at the polls, and from my perspective, from one poll particularly, like to seize on things, like to seize on terms for their own benefits.
Right.
Okay. Right. And that's what's happened with what's called critical race theory. And the fact is that many of the commentators, the people who are writing about this and speaking about it on television and the rest, don't have a clue about what critical race theory is.
Right.
All right. They're talking about critical race theory being taught in classrooms, which is basically nonsense outside of universities and particularly law schools, because that's where critical race theory came from.
Okay.
Right. It's a theory that was developed by a Black Harvard law professor, Derek Bell, as a way to unravel concepts about the development of US law and society.
Okay.
So I would invite the critics to go into any classroom, secondary school, primary school, most colleges, and see if they could identify this thing that they say is rampant.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because to put it very simply, what they're talking about is nonsense. Okay?
Okay.
Now, on the other hand, and in fact, earlier today, I read this thing from, there's an organization based in Arizona called the Goldwater Institute.
Okay. Which
is a conservative think tank, action group, whatever. And the head on the commentary from the group was Marxism leaking into classrooms with a hidden agenda to change America. Okay? And I was saying to myself, well, I'm, like with critical race theory, I'm not sure these people know what Marxist theory is. I mean, people like to talk about Marx, but they've never read Das Kapital or the Communist Manifesto. So in short, as often the case, they don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
But on the agenda to change America, I'm saying that's absolutely true. And it's true because America needs changing, because there's a lot that's wrong and it needs changing. Now, what I would do is I'd strike out hidden. It's not hidden. I mean, what you're arguing about is you don't like the way people are talking about change.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the fact that in fact, you don't like the change in the American population.
Right.
You don't like the fact that those who identify as white or European are rapidly becoming a minority in the nation.
Right.
You don't like the fact that more and more people don't speak English as a first language. Mm-hmm. You don't like the fact that we have not a homogeneous society, but a heterogeneous society, right? Those facts are not hidden. Those are facts you don't want to deal with. Mm-hmm. So back to critical race theory and the teaching of US history is you don't want US history to be taught truthfully and accurately, right? Yeah. You don't want to have a discussion of American Negro slavery. Mm-hmm. You don't want to have a forthright stand-up discussion about what happened to the Native American peoples. Mm-hmm. You don't want to hear about policies of genocide. You don't want to.
I think I lost you a little bit.
Long walk. You don't want to hear about the homelands of people being burned down. Okay.
Dr. Davis, I'm losing you a little bit on my end. I don't know. Give me a second here. I think.
You guys with me?
I can hear.
Are you with me?
I can hear.
I think that I was becoming a little too something there, and I got cut out.
Yeah. Yeah.
The people in charge did not want to hear that.
Yeah, very much so. Hold on, let me just make sure the connection's good. I think we're good. I think I got you now.
I'm still here. I don't. Yeah.
Little delay.
Okay.
All right. I think we're good. Seems fine now.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So somebody was messing around in the matrix,
right?
For sure.
No. Now your audio has gone out.
Our audio has gone out.
Okay. You're back. You're back.
Okay. All right.
I think we're all right. I think we're good.
Okay.
Okay.
Make sure. I want to ask
on some things you need to speak softly, right?
Yeah.
So that you don't get cut out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. So let me ask you, what do you think about what are your opinions on some things? What are some things that are different? Some changes, some positive changes that you've seen throughout your life and career as far as civil rights goes that are happening today, that are occurring today, and what are some of the similarities to some of the negative things that were going on, earlier in your career and life that you're still seeing today as well?
All right. So first, the point is that when we look at human rights or equal rights, mm-hmm. It's a continuum, right? Mm-hmm. It's not an issue of we are one day going to overcome,
right?
That day,
right?
Okay, because going back in 64 and 65, when we got the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, people talking about okay, and that's what you hear today from the conservative side. Listen, so you got what you asked for. Can you be quiet and go home now and everything is good? And the answer to that is that no, that was a way station, right? That was a point along the way. That was not the end point, because there really is no end point here.
Agreed.
So you asked about progress. And the thing is, there has been tremendous progress. Mm-hmm. And the answer to that is there haven't been enough, right? There has not been enough.
Right.
So you can see, or I can see progress all the time. I turn on the television and I see people who look like you. Mm-hmm. right? Because if you go back to the 50s and you look at this at shows, what was on, right? Black people did not have shows.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so we have this continuation of firsts. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. You've got the Nat King Cole show for 15 minutes, a first.
Right.
So across the visual landscape of America, it's changed. You see Blacks in advertising. You see minority people everywhere, not just in the kitchen or in the janitorial spaces, right?
Right, right,
Okay.
right.
All right. So none of that is to be dismissed. On the other side, well, I guess in a sort of simple sense, I taught in Louisiana in the 1960s. Okay.
Okay.
And I remember going from New York down to Louisiana, and
which had to be a culture shock.
You think?
Right.
I don't know. I mean, hey, I don't know what gave you that insight.
No,
but I really, I remember getting off the plane and going outside and seeing what I thought was a caricature of a police officer, literally with the bare belly and the 45 strapped down on his hip, low down on his hip like a cowboy. Mm-hmm. And you know, New York cops at the time had 38s, much smaller pistol anyway. Right. Where I was going with that is that Black people back in the 60s were still being sent to separate entrances to the grocery store, to whatever. And I could not say, what? So, y'all don't need to be doing that, right?
Right.
Just don't do that. And right. Of course, they thought I was crazy and that's a Yankee N-word, right?
Right.
The boy's just crazy.
Right.
He doesn't understand how it is here.
How we do it here, yes.
Yeah, and so those things have changed. Mm-hmm. I remember pulling into a gas station in Mississippi, and the white attendant who was sitting on his stool refused to get up and service my vehicle. And that was back in the days. There was no self-service then, right? So right. There's a whole world of, the world has changed.
Right.
The world has changed. All right. So on the other side of that, when you look at the prison industrial complex in the United States, you have to say, well, you know, things have changed because they're putting more of our folk, more of our men folk, and increasingly more of our women folk. Because if you look at the growth in prison population, the women's population has grown, it's growing faster than the male population. Mm-hmm. So the effect of the criminal law system in the United States has always weighed most heavily on non-white persons. Mm-hmm. And it's weighing even more heavily now.
Yeah.
And you know, we often get sidetracked. So the discussion about abolish the police has been politicized into a sidetrack, right? The issue, in my view, is about protect and serve the whole population in the same way.
Right.
All right?
Right.
Part of that is also about how you serve and protect. Mm-hmm. All the tasks that are in serve and protect do not have to be carried out by persons who are carrying deadly weapons.
Mm-hmm. True.
there is a mental health crisis in the United States.
100%.
100%.
That people are not paying attention to.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that someone is having a mental health issue does not mean that you need to taser the person. It certainly doesn't mean that you need to throw the person down on the ground, kneel on their neck, or certainly not shoot them.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than talking about abolishing the police, we might talk about how we can reform the serve and protect tasks.
I like that.
Can we have people who understand how to do counseling, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
How to diffuse situations.
Yeah.
I mean, when I see or read stories of a 14-year-old girl who's snatched out of a classroom, thrown to the ground, handcuffed, and brutalized by police, I'm thinking, how was that necessary?
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm. The issue here is that a whole lot of tripwires have been tripped in this situation.
Right.
And we as a society need to pay attention to that. And it's not retreating to the polls, saying blue lives matter, right? Whatever the police do is okay. No, that's not a solution to real world problems.
Right.
How are we going to deal with real world problems is the question. And so it's not necessarily a question about taking money from the police. It's talking about how you distribute public funds to meet public needs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a good friend of mine, Jacob Rayford, who's actually working on that. And it has been for the last 2 years, and putting together some things. We're actually going to have him on the show in a few weeks. And he's been a big advocate of trying to put together some organizations. I think he actually has a couple that he's working on right now. So it's great that you say that, because I know he's been a part of a big movement to try to get people that and really focus on the mental health and use some of our public workers in a different way, so we can, help with some of these situations and take the police out of it, so it's great that you say that. Did you have some?
No.
Oh, okay, so I thought you were going to say something. What do you think about social media, and how that plays? Because media has always played into civil rights, human rights, but now with social media being so accessible, you can just get on your phone and get a piece of information, whether it's true, whether it's not. What negative and or positive roles do you think social media plays in today's movement for civil rights?
Well, communication has always been important.
Okay.
Right?
Yes,
in
sir.
shaping public opinions and in shaping individual perspectives.
Right.
So the key to the 1950s civil rights successes goes back to television. Because before people could see the pictures, they were less likely to believe.
Right.
Jump to today, whether you're going to talk about George Floyd or whoever, if people don't have the cell phones with cameras and recording the incidents, people not only don't believe, but people are not held accountable. Okay? So social media is like anything else. There's a one side and there's another side. What it allows is for something which Freedom's Journal the first Black-owned operated newspaper in the United States, that we now can tell our own story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
mm-hmm.
So social media allows for that.
Okay.
What social media has done in large part is to fragment society further. Because if you go back to the 1950s, there were 3 major television networks. Mm-hmm. If you wanted your news, you got it from CBS, NBC, or ABC, right? Mm-hmm. So in a sense, we were all on the same page in terms of information that we got broadcast.
Right, right.
So we could be in our own bubble, as it were, but there were only 3 bubbles. I mean, there were 3 big bubbles.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
Today, there are tens of thousands of bubbles, and we can all stay in our own little bubble. And so we're not having communication. In a sense, we're having too often indoctrination because there's no exchange. To me, that's more than very dangerous.
Yeah.
I don't see a way out of it.
Yeah.
And, the discussion about what you're going to do with Section 230 and holding platforms accountable, I don't see how that works. In a sense, the genie is out of the bottle.
Right.
And you're not going to get the genie back in the bottle. And you're not going to build a bottle that's big enough to hold all the genies, right? Because now there's no longer a single genie. There are lots of genies.
Right.
Now, on the one hand, you can look at societies like the People's Republic of China, who I think are the foremost in using their technologies to control what is exchanged in the society. Okay. I don't see how the United States can't get there. I don't think that the United States wants to get there. I don't want the United States to get there. Okay. But there needs to be some accountability. And I don't have a solution to how we get to that accountability.
Yeah.
Currently, you probably have noticed from the news reports that the former governor of Alaska and the one-time vice presidential Republican candidate, Sarah Palin, is engaged in a trial against the New York Times, saying that she was libeled, right? And so that reaches back to a U.S. Supreme Court decision, U.S. v. Sullivan. So won't go there with the law, but the issue is that that process is outdated. And when I say that it's outdated, is that the legal process often takes years to unravel, right? Years to come to a solution.
Right.
Social media, if you talk about what happened last year, nobody's
going to remember.
Right. You don't know what happened. What's trending, right?
Right.
Yeah.
What's trending is not last week.
Right.
Right. What's trending what happened earlier today.
Right.
And so when you look at things going viral, you can't pull that stuff back.
Right.
And you can't once the image is gone, the image is gone.
Yeah.
So I don't have an answer to your question about what you do with social media. Social media has brought us lots of good things, like allowing persons who don't have, quote, clout to have influence.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. It allows you to be where you are and allows me to be here and say what we're saying.
Yes, sir.
I mean, who's watching? So we used to talk about preaching to the choir, right? And so social media, in my view, in terms of podcasts and the rest, is pretty much about preaching to the choir.
That's true.
Okay. And so, so often I think that people who need to hear stuff are exactly the people who aren't listening to that channel. Okay.
Yeah.
So we get lots of reinforcement in our daily lives, but we don't get lots of enlightenment in our daily lives.
Very true.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, it kind of goes back to your change and stuff that we were talking about, or what you were talking about. You know, I feel, and you mentioned it too, is the communication part of that. And I know that's why we started what we started doing, was because of communication.
Yeah.
We wanted to have some sort of communication. We've done stuff on, we're no experts, but talked about mental health and, you know, just all different kinds of topics and discussions about relations and relationships. And I really feel that the reason we're not changing, or it's hard for us to change, it's hard for anybody to change anything, really. When you really kind of think about moving forward, people get stuck into a rut and go through the motions of same old daily stuff, whether, you know, it could be mundane and just stepping out of that. And it could be just something really simple. And so really hard for people to get out of there. But I think communication is the key to that. And I agree with you. I'm kind of just piggybacking off of what you just said, because it is true. We tend to preach to the choir. Our audience is our choir. We're preaching to the choir.
Very true.
And the communication part is so key. And you see it just day to day, like when I walk through my regular job that I have, and the lack of communication to get a particular job done falls so flat so many different times. And it's actually really frustrating to kind of go through this on a continual basis, and without people hearing what you have to say, you know? So anyway, that's just my little piece on communication. I just really think communication is so vital to humans in general, of just talking to one another. We all have differences. We have a lot of similarities too with one another, you know? And if we would just open our eyes and kind of see that, I think a lot of people would be in the same boat. We'd be surfing right around in this middle area.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But everybody for some reason, wants to be pushed all the way off to the sides instead of being somewhere center, you know, left center, right center. You know, what happened to that, you know?
So you asked me earlier about things that have changed and not changed. And I want to reach to one of the bugaboos. And that is that when you look at public schools in 2022, they're more segregated today than they were in 1954. 1954, back to Brown v. Board of Education. Almost everywhere, public schools are in a worse circumstance than they were in 2022. I mean, than they were in 1954.
Okay.
In 2022, they're in a worse place. Why is that? Well, in large part is because the nation, not just communities, but the nation has abandoned public education as a value.
True. Very true. Very true.
We don't want our children to go to school with those children.
Right.
All right.
Right.
And so the United States, when you look at its residential grids, is residentially segregated, right?
Yes, very much so.
And much of that residential segregation does fall on income.
Right.
But income also unfolds on race and gender.
Yeah.
It used to be that public education was, you're talking about a central value, something we could all agree to. Well, we don't any longer all agree to it.
Yeah.
We don't agree to what should be taught in schools. We don't agree who should be in schools. We don't want our money to go to those schools.
Right.
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 And that comes back to the issue of whether you call it vouchers, tax credits, whatever. The drain is from public schools as an institution is just drained away. And that's not only, K through 12, that's also true for public universities.
Yeah.
So schools are a place where there is at least supposed to be communication, and there is definitely interaction, right?
Right.
You know the folks you went to school with.
Mm-hmm.
And for better or worse, they had an influence on you.
Mm-hmm.
They had an influence on how you think about things and how you think about other folk.
Yeah.
Right.
They allowed you to meet some other folk. When, that interaction among groups is largely not taking place any longer.
Yeah.
And that's through K through university, because while we don't talk about it as such, we have tracking. And the tracking may be actual schools, whether you talk about them as magnet schools or whatever, right? Or programs within schools.
Mm-hmm.
Or you talk about honors colleges and whatever. However you want to do that, folks are being separated and segregated.
Yeah.
That's not conducive to a society that has common values. And here we come back to it. We don't have common values. We often use common language, but we don't mean the same thing, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. When we talk about my country, 'tis of thee, we're not talking about the same thing, unfortunately.
Yes.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
When we're talking about law and order, we're not talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
And when we talk about reform to improve, we are not talking about the same thing.
Right. We're not even in the same room. Right.
We're not.
Right.
Yeah.
We're not.
I want to talk about some of your work as a lawyer. You did pro bono work, correct?
Yes.
Talk about that. Why you chose. I mean, I've noticed, especially people who have a civil rights background, tend to do a lot of pro bono work, and obviously it's I would think because of where you come from, community. But talk to us about your work as a lawyer and specifically with pro bono work.
Well, I over the years, I did a lot of work with Community Legal Services, which is the basic pro bono organization in Arizona and certainly in Maricopa County.
Okay.
I was going to say we used to have something. We still have it. It's called legal aid. There is a federal legal aid program. And if anyone is interested, they can look at the federal budget and see how the budget for legal aid has continually gone down. All right. So in my perspective, law is a public profession. We get licensed by the public.
Right.
Doctors take an oath to do no harm. Right? Lawyers take an oath to see justice done. Well, it turns out that to not talk about have your day in court, but to get legal solutions, for the most part, you need legal representation.
Right.
Well, that costs money. And so for people who don't have money, if they don't somehow have legal representation, they're cut out of the legal system.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you started off the program asking me about my background. I was talking to you about what today people call as the hood. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I noticed at the time, and looking back on my life, and particularly going to school and interacting with folks who weren't from the hood,
right,
is that the people I grew up with did not resort to the law to solve their problems, for better or worse.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And another sort of segue, diversion, if you like. I spoke to you earlier about school and people being disciplined. I'm troubled by what's happening in our schools in terms of discipline. I don't understand why you have to call a police officer for a 7-year-old kid.
Right. Right.
Okay. Back in antediluvian times, you got a note sent home, and that was straightened out. That was straightened out, period. I mean, there was no further discussion about that.
It was handled.
Okay. So there was a fracas in the playground, right? Mm-hmm. And there are going to be fracases in playgrounds because kids are kids, and particularly boys are boys, right?
Yes.
Two kids have a scuffle. That's not a police matter.
No.
Okay. That's, we used to talk about being called on the carpet, but that's, you go down to the principal's office or whatever, guidance, whoever it is, right? A phone call is made to the parents and whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I don't know, somebody's mother is incapacitated and can't care for the kid, right? Well, you don't call Child Protective Services to come and snatch the kid into an institution. Even if there are no family in that community, someone sees that that child is cared for.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So that's a long way of my saying that we have different societies when it comes to the operation of the law.
Yeah.
When people get drawn into the formal operation of the law, they need formal help.
Yes.
So, there I am. And one of the things I used to say is that if I had $100 to dispense or spend for each of the cases that I handle at Community Legal Services, I could have solved 99.97% of all the cases that I saw.
Right.
Because it was things like someone has a job. They have a car that their transportation is running with rubber bands. It's a Friday. It's payday. They need their check. They can't get the car to work that day. Can't get the car to work that morning, right? They don't get to work. They don't get the check. Rent is due Monday, or rent is due later that day, right?
Right.
They can't pay rent. Landlord wants to evict them because they didn't pay rent, or landlord says, okay, you didn't pay rent, I'm gonna charge you late fees.
Right.
Monday comes, they get into work, they come back, they want to pay the rent, and landlord says, well, you owe another $90 or whatever it is. Well, what are they going to do?
Yeah. Yeah.
they're already tapped out, so they're not going down to one of the extortionate payday loans or whatever.
Right.
They don't have
anything to work with.
Right.
And going down there is going to put them further in the hole. They're not. Okay.
Right.
So they come down to community legal services because basically word of mouth, somebody said, well, you know what you should do is
go down there.
Is go get a lawyer. I
Right.
don't have any money for a lawyer. So it's now go down to community legal services. And, you know, if you're lucky, you can make a phone call and get things sorted out.
Right.
My point here is that legal services pro bono work is so often about providing an intervention that keeps people from getting hit in the head with a sledgehammer.
Right, right.
When there's really there's no need for any heavy hitting. There's no need for hitting at all.
Right, right.
We can resolve this, okay?
Yeah.
We can resolve the problem. And I will say to you that I got more satisfaction out of handling the cases and being able to provide assistance than I think I provided assistance, okay?
Yeah.
It's sometimes you see things that are wrong and you're able to do something about it. And I mean, there's a satisfaction. Forget anything wrong. I mean, you have a problem in the house, the faucet is leaking, right? And you get out the bunking wrench or whatever, and you stop the leak.
Right.
You feel good about that.
Yeah.
Right? You feel good about it.
Oh yeah.
And to the degree that you're able to do something for somebody else.
Yeah.
There's a satisfaction in that.
Yeah.
And the notion that to put very simply, I mean, all gratification is not derived through money.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So I'm not going to knock money now. Okay.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
But what I'm telling you is we don't need to do everything on a monetary exchange basis.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Very true.
Very true. Well, Dr. Davis, thank you so much. I would love to have you back on maybe later in the year because I have more notes.
Yeah, we got a lot more
questions. I have, but I want to let you enjoy the rest of your Saturday. And I have a dog that's crying at my door right now, so I think he has to go out. But we thank you so much for your knowledge and your stories. And I hope people get a chance to see this that really need to see it. And even if we are preaching to the choir, maybe we're preaching something that maybe they didn't know already. And they can use that knowledge to better their progress in this world and in the movement. So thank you so much. We appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and thank you.
Okay. Listen, you should end by telling them what the link is that they can send the link to somebody else.
You mean
your link, right?
Our link, right?
Yeah. You want to tell them to hook up.
See, this is the cool thing is when the video goes out, I'll have a list of the links.
All right.
And then it'll be ready. So okay. I don't know. Do you have any social media?
No, I don't.
I figured you were too old school for that, you know?
There you go.
So
all right.
I respect it. Hey,
all right.
I'm not mad at you.
So I'll be looking forward to my mailbox.
Yeah. Okay, for sure.
All right, man.
We'll definitely email it to you.
Peace.
Thanks again.
Peace. All right.